Well, the big change that takes place for all investors is we keep learning more things and our understandings and different mental models get more resilient and get stronger. Like, for example, the boom and bust mental model, which, I encountered maybe 20 plus years ago, but it took this period of time to really appreciate kind of all the nuances associated with that. And so, we get expertise in different industries over time that we didn't have. We get expertise in different ways of looking at things, maybe different geographies and cultures. And so all of that is going to help. At the same time, the second big change that's taken place in the last 3 decades is that I used to manage like $1 million for myself, in 1995. And now it's over $1 billion. So obviously that changes the universe of what you look at. So competence grows. If you're doing well, the assets will grow, and all of that will naturally drive some tweaks and changes to kind of what you're doing and where you're looking. The most important skill for an investor to have is patience. I think that's the number one thing, is that all businesses, after you invest in them, are going to surprise you in many ways. Many times those surprises are negative. Sometimes those surprises are positive. But it's almost never going to happen that what you thought is how it's going to play out is how it actually plays out. So I would say, the first skill set is extreme patience. The second skill set in many of these companies is a lot of comfort with uncertainty. So I've talked about this several times, that risk and uncertainty are two separate things. And a lot of investors get confused between the two. And a lot of investors are looking for certainty. And if you're looking for certainty, like Buffett says, you will pay a high price for a cheery consensus. So if you have comfort with uncertainty, and the greater the uncertainty with a low risk, a combination of high uncertainty with low risk is likely to give you great reward if you are patient. So I think that's the equation, and that would fit coal business. The risk is low, the uncertainty is high, patience is key, and one should love watching paint dry. There's a number of countries where I just don't want to go. I don't want to go to Russia. I don't want to go to Venezuela. I don't want to go to Zimbabwe. I mean, there's a lot of countries like that where I think that basic, respect for property rights and basic respect for investor capital and, capital flows and such may be questioned. The good news is that an investor can have an extremely tight set of conditions that need to be met for them to be interested in going to a particular geography. I always talk about the example of John Arriega, who was Charlie Munger's friend, who only invested in real estate within a mile of the Stanford campus. That's all he did. And actually, if you walked with him around Stanford, every building he could tell you the history, the rents, kind of what has transpired, who owns it, whatever. He knew every single building cold. His knowledge was extreme. And John Arriega, died a billionaire, very narrow circle of competence. Obviously never invested outside the US, never invested out of California, never invested outside of that very tight radius around Stanford, and worked extremely well for him. So we don't need large circles of competence, and we don't need to be going to, esoteric places or countries. We should do what we're comfortable with. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity everywhere. So it's a question of, how well you are versed in seeing it and acting on it.
If you were starting from scratch today, let's say with $1 million, how would you do it?
Well, I think that the anomalies would be of deep interest. So these are, these weird special situations and such, because we could go into a lot of nooks and crannies that we can't go into with the funds. I could even do some of it with long-term options and such. So I think that the focus would almost completely be on these special situation anomalies and kind of take it from there, because we'd be putting like $100,000 to work on a given idea. And if you're going to put 100,000 to work, there's a huge universe of opportunities to look at, because almost anything is a possibility. So that's what I would do.
So basically take advantage of the small size to do things that bigger funds cannot do.
Yeah, one of the interesting things about investing is, and I think Joel Greenblatt had pointed this out, he said that if you are a really good investor and you're starting out and you have a very small amount of capital and you do very well, So let's say you start with $100,000 or $1 million. Well, if you're exceptional at what you do, what will happen is that that million is going to grow to 10 million or 100 million or a billion. The very tiny stuff that you were doing when you started, in a few years or maybe a decade, you won't be able to do it anymore because it just would make no sense for you. So you would have to leave those, what I would call fertile pastures, to find larger, not so fertile pastures, which still have some good yield. But what ends up happening is that you open up that white space for a new young person coming in with 100,000 or $1 million. So basically, in effect, what's happening is the very low end of the market has this constant exodus taking place of the best players. So the ones who are extremely good at it have no choice but to leave that space. So it's kind of an evergreen situation where, that kind of batch graduates, and then those opportunity sets are available for the next batch, and then that next batch graduates and it's available for the next batch after that. So it's kind of evergreen from that perspective, in the sense that if you are looking in these nooks and crannies, there is a lot of opportunity because the guys who are really good at it have already moved on. They had no choice but to move. I realized that I was doing my investors a disservice. I mean, the negative of interacting with management, which is what I taken from Ben Graham, is that they're great salespeople. That's what got the CEOs into their jobs to begin with. And so if you're talking to a great salesman about a subject he knows everything about and you know nothing, you're likely to get swayed. And I think that still happens to me. I still get swayed. But I think that many times the interactions with management can help you understand the nature of management and how they think about capital allocation and things, and how they think about their business and kind of the different decisions they're making and so on. So I think it can help long term to have a better sense of what they are all about and what these people are and how they think and so on. So if I have the choice today, I would spend more time with senior management and the CEO and such, if it's available to me. And sometimes that's not a choice, and that's okay. We can kind of roll with that as well, because none of this is related to anything that they can tell you which is going to help you next quarter or anything like that. I mean, we're looking 5, 10 years out. And like, for example, when I'm meeting the management teams and I, went into the mines of the different coal companies, the single greatest driver of how well we do long term with coal is the price of coal. And none of them can really help you with that. They just don't have any crystal ball that's better than your crystal ball. So that's the 800-pound gorilla in that case. But you can understand from the interactions, who would be the best companies and the best teams and, the best culture. And then, can kind of take it from there.